Welcome to the Plant-Based Podcast. Did you know that plants are truly amazing? Not only can you grow them and eat them, you can also wear them, drink them, nourish your skin with them, and so much more. Let Ellen and Michael inspire you to love plants as much as they do, as they chat with the movers and shakers in this wonderful plant-based world. So, let's dig in.
Series 19 of the Plant-Based Podcast is sponsored by Queen and Fine Floral Design. Enjoy gorgeous flowers to lift your mood or gift to a loved one with stunning seasonal bouquets, monthly subscriptions, eloquent wedding flowers, and home floral decorations. Queen and Fine bring nature-led designs to your home because flowers really do make people happy. Now serving in Charlotte, North Carolina, including surrounding areas, and in the UK from 2026. Check us out at queenandfine.com and follow us on Instagram at queenandfine.
Hey guys, welcome to today's episode where we're going to be diving into a topic that's been top of mind for many UK horticultural businesses. It's the EU reset, which was announced in 2025. To understand why this reset is so important, we need to take a step back and look at the impact of Brexit on UK businesses. Since the UK left the European Union, trade with the EU has become much more complicated, especially for industries that rely on the free flow of goods, such as horticulture. Plant health regulations, new import and export rules, and increased paperwork have made it more difficult and costly to move plants across borders. For the industry, which imports about half of what it sells, these changes have been felt acutely. What began as small delays and rising costs quickly escalated into a very serious issue. For businesses that were already dealing with the fallout of Brexit, the additional burden of plant health regulations and custom checks, it put many under financial strain. However, fast forward to 2025 and there's hope on the horizon. The EU reset is a new agreement between the UK and the EU aimed at reviewing and simplifying their trading relationship. Particularly, this will help around plant health, reduce costly delays, and the complexities that businesses have faced. The reset marks a big win for the horticulture sector, which has been pushing for change for years. Today, we're joined by Sally Cullimore and Jennifer Pheasey from the HTA. These two have been at the forefront of lobbying for change and advocating for the horticulture industry's needs. They'll walk us through the details of the reset, what it means for businesses, and how the HTA has worked tirelessly to ensure the sector's voice is heard. So, Sally and Jennifer, thank you for joining us today. To begin, can you help our listeners understand the key challenges that the horticultural sector have faced in the aftermath of Brexit? And specifically, how did those changes in the plant health regulations and import checks really create barriers for businesses in our industry?
It's a really great question, Michael, and I think it's one that many people are sort of grappling with on a daily basis. But to really simplify it, we went from being inside one shared plant health area to being outside. And when you're outside and you're a third country with your biggest trading area, both from an import and an export perspective, that means you suddenly have a barrier at the border and it looks like this. It means you've got paperwork, you've got costs and processes, and you've got to work with all of those. And that means you're adding time and a new job into your business that you weren't doing before. But it didn't come in one go. It really came in 3 different stages. So we saw the first aftermath where we started to have to go through the legislation to develop it and actually eventually leave the EU. And that's when people started to need to record new information and get to know their supply chains differently. Most people knew their supply chains by great friendships and knowing who's best at supplying different plants and different products. Suddenly they had to know and integrate their systems and information with them. That was the first stage. There was then the stage where people were checking at the point of destination and having to do new paperwork that they weren't doing before and having to comply legally. So that was the sort of second stage. And then there's the one more recently, which I think has been the one with really hitting people hard. And that's where suddenly we're seeing those checks happening at the border, where people have been really thrown into the dark and now they just don't know what's happening with their goods. and it's taking a lot of time, and they're seeing the damage and costs. So it's really left businesses in horticulture in a position where they're having to change how they're doing their business, and what they do and where they get things from, and ultimately providing customers in some cases with different reduced ranges. So that's been a kind of a difficult time.
Okay, thank you. I think that explains it really, really well in a nutshell, kind of what has been happening over this past few years, really. I think before we go into the full interview, like, you girls are going to take different questions that relate to different areas. But tell us, first of all, top line, what your specific roles in the HTA are, just so that listeners can get a handle on that.
I'll let Sally go first on this one, because she is the detailed expert. Sally.
Thanks, Jennifer. So I'm Sally Cullimore. I'm the Technical and Trade Policy Manager in the Horticultural Trades Association. So I've recently had the word trade added into my job title because we take it very seriously, and it is something that we all do within the horticultural sector. We all trade in some sort of item, and a lot of that trade is across borders, whether that's from the EU or whether that's from further afield. So my job entails looking at the technical aspects of trade, and how those aspects would impact our members if, for example, the government changed a policy or a piece of legislation. And my job is to interpret that for our members, to make sure they understand how to comply within their businesses, but also to talk to government, the officials and the people making the policy and the legislation before it sort of happens, to head things off at the pass if we possibly can, to make sure that our businesses aren't adversely affected. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, but at least I'm there to help them through.
Okay, and Jennifer, your role, please.
I'm Director of Policy and Public Affairs at the HTA, and I've been there for 3 years. So Sally was really involved in the work and the impacts of Brexit before I joined. But I joined from another sector where I have brought with, I hope, expertise in lobbying, and that is that political engagement piece. So actually engaging with the right people to get the issues of our members understood, the profile of the issues raised, and ultimately work to try and find solutions, and do that through a strategic engagement plan and taking the voice of our members right into the heart of Westminster where these decisions are being made.
Fantastic. Well, as we talk through the podcast today, we'll find that you really are doing a great job, both of you. So first of all, so Sally, we're going to come to you. So as we're talking about Brexit, great introduction that we had to Brexit there from Jennifer. So could you explain how the UK's departure from the EU actually affected plant health and the ease of trade? And what were some of those immediate impacts that HTA members saw in the first few months after the UK left the EU? Because a lot of paperwork, right?
A lot of paperwork, right, exactly. Jennifer very succinctly and very well described the 3 phases that the sector has gone to, and each one has had its own impacts on businesses, and both in the UK and also in the EU as well. So actually, truth be told, 1st of January 2021, when we actually Brexited, we were the first sector, I say we as in the horticultural trade, were the first sector to be impacted by controls. At that time, we thought that they were pretty stiff and difficult to work with. Little did we know that, 3 years later, we'd be impacted by that final phase where everything had to be checked at the border. However, the first phase brought us a lot of paperwork and visits from plant health inspectors to our premises to do import inspection checks. So that is when you import something, it has to be checked by a plant health inspector, by the National Plant Protection Organisation and its agencies. Sounds very official, which it is, but it basically means your AFA inspector will come along and check the stuff that you've imported. Truth be told, wasn't too bad. It did buy us extra costs, about 30 million quid into the whole supply chain, which is quite significant. And in a time when costs were rising, 2021, 2022, 2023, costs were rising for businesses. And that meant that, margins were being squeezed, prices were going up, and Brexit definitely contributed to price rises. That last final phase where we had to have the checks done, not on our own premises, but at the border, that is where we saw costs skyrocket, difficulties with hauliers, for example, being stopped at the border. I've had 2 messages this morning, because it's still happening. I've had 2 messages this morning saying my stuff's been held at the border since Sunday. What am I going to do? There's live plants on there. I don't know what's wrong with it. There's nothing plant health wise. It's paperwork. I don't know how to resolve it. The drivers got so fed up now. That's just one incident. And it's not positive at all. It's not a positive experience. So that means that haulier will go back and say, I don't really want to take stuff to the UK anymore. That exporting business may well lose those plants. They've grown them for years. And the importing business doesn't receive the plants that they've ordered, or it's delayed, or they miss a job. There's so many extra impacts, as well as the paperwork and the checks.
Okay. But the reason that we've got you on the podcast today is because, hallelujah, in 2025, the EU reset. Now that sounds very official, but you're both going to take me through that and kind of explain what that really means. And that was aiming to address those challenges, which was great. So can you give us an overview of what the reset will actually do for the UK and the EU relationship, particularly for horticulture as well, and what that will mean in terms of those plant health and trade regulations as well? So hopefully there's a light on the horizon, right?
Absolutely. So the 19th of May was the key day, where the Labour government announced that they had come to a common understanding with the EU that there would be a reset of our relationship. So mainly focusing on the trading relationship and the difficulties that had been, as described earlier, had been brought by Brexit to traders. So this is in the area of sanitary and phytosanitary. Sounds difficult, but actually it's about certification of food, animals, plants, and any products that are associated with that. This reset now means that that certification and the checks at the border will be removed. So both the EU and the UK have agreed to have an agreement, not quite there yet, to remove those checks and those certificates. And also there's other areas that are attached to the EU reset as well that may well impact on the horticultural trade, but the SPS agreement, as we call it, is the main one. There are other areas like a youth mobility scheme, which is, that's great that we can exchange young people to work in our various sectors, and also alignment of energy trading schemes, which may drive costs down in some way. The key point is that in the area of plant health, we will dynamically align with the EU, which basically that means we will follow the EU plant health rules as we have done before, and that plant health area that Jennifer mentioned in her introduction, we will rejoin it. So we will once again be one single plant health area between the UK and the EU.
Superb. Wow. So, Jennifer, let's talk about the journey there, because of course the HTA has been at the forefront of the lobbying for this reset. So what were some of the key issues that you brought to the government's attention, and how did you work to ensure that horticulture wasn't overlooked in these discussions, as it so often is as well? Because of course a lot of different sectors were impacted by Brexit, weren't they?
Yeah, and I think you've highlighted something in that question, which is that feeling of being overlooked. So our absolute top priority was to get recognition and understanding at all levels of policy making. So from the very top of government, a very high political level, right down to those officials working on a day-to-day basis to really understand the impact on the sector. And so everything we do has an evidence base to it. So every time our member shares a story, a challenge, a problem, the one Sally's received this morning, we do feed those into government. And we tell them, look, this is still going on and this is hitting these businesses, because this ultimately will stop them investing in something else. It might mean that they could, they're not creating more jobs, whatever it might be, is really to really take that voice and evidence in there, and also to make the benefits of the sector understood, and really sell why we matter in horticulture. Now, our job in HTA is to support our members to flourish. Ultimately, they will decide and make their own business decisions, but we are there to help try and create the conditions for them to be as successful as possible, because what they do drives growth, economic growth, green growth. It's good for the economy, environment. All of what we know working in the sector is so right. Is to make that really understood in government. And I think we've been actually really successful in doing that. And we've done that in partnership with our members, but also used our expertise at HTA to be sat at the top table in meetings with ministers very frequently, taking people out, ministers to visit and see members, MPs out there, and really having a really sort of strategic integrated campaign. What we have said again and again, we've had to sort of mention all the time, is we are a sector majority SME businesses. People don't have a lot of fat in their businesses to be able to be, spending things on, here, there, and everywhere. They are very lean, and that really needs to be understood. And often it is the owners who are there doing the paperwork at 4 o'clock in the morning when there's a truck stuck at the border. This is a real thing. I think the other thing is just that the fact that we are a sector where we're moving what are categorized as high risk. Now, we have a view on whether all of those should be in that category. So we are hardest hit, and that often hasn't been understood. And as Sally said already, we were absolutely at the forefront of those. We were having, the checks here, paper, everything was on us. And it still is. So I think we really are sort of keeping that going. What we've also tried to be solutions focused. We realised that this was ultimately, it was an act of democracy which has led us to be in a situation where we are today, where we have left the EU. Therefore, we've tried to be pragmatic, constructive, and take solutions every time that we talk about things. So we're not in there just to moan. We've had plenty of rants. But we're there to try and bring solutions. What's the best outcome which delivers both sides? And then the other thing which I am particularly I think excited about, and I know, Michael, you go a lot to the Netherlands and elsewhere, is we've worked internationally. The only way that we've been able to achieve an EU-UK reset with the SPS agreement, the jewel in the crown of that first set of negotiations, is because it benefits both sides. So we have absolutely, on a daily basis, made sure everything that we face into the UK government, we are also working in collaboration with our sister associations across Europe. And Sally and I probably take as many, challenges and messages from people saying, something stuck, from outside the UK as we do inside the UK. And I think that's really important, because it takes two to negotiate. And so we need to work in tandem.
Excellent. Wow. So Sally, the reset is then aiming to simplify the processes, get rid of the delays. What specific changes do you think businesses will see when it comes to importing plants and plant products? Will we have the streamlined process we had before Brexit, for example?
Excellent question. So what we've got to remember is this isn't a return back into the EU. It's a place of, it's a better place for us. So it is a little bit unknown as to what we might see. I know that we said that there was an agreement to have an agreement, and nothing's agreed until it's all agreed. So there has to be a period of negotiation to go through. But what we do know is that the common agreement, the common understanding, is about removing the weighting and removing as much of the cost as we can possibly do so. The negotiations are yet to start, but we know what the starting position is. We know that we will be seeing a removal of phytosanitary certificates. Okay. So don't forget, there's also an export element to this. So each side is doing the same thing as the other. So we have to remove both of those things from both sides. So, for example, an export certificate, if someone in GB was exporting some plants to the EU or Northern Ireland, we will no longer be requiring a phytosanitary certificate for that. Okay. There will be no checks at the border for the plants at all, and that includes food products, and that includes anything that requires a certificate or a check. Okay. Flowers, food products, animals, growing media, and any of that stuff. No more checks at the border. So that's what we are expecting to see at the end of this process.
Fantastic. And a major component of that reset is the plant health area, the EU plant health area. How significant will that be in reducing paperwork and making trade a little bit more smoother? What exactly does that mean for UK businesses?
It's another excellent question, because, and I'm afraid I'm going to say we're not quite sure yet, because we have to go through the negotiation process to reach an end point. And then we have to go through a period of writing legislation, both in the EU and the UK. And then we have to go through a period of implementation. And that implementation bit, that's where we will see what that day-to-day business actually looks like in its final state. But again, we are not in a good place at the moment, and it will be a better place at the end of it. Okay. So while we can guess at what we might end up with, we are in a place where we know we will be in a better place.
Yeah. Okay. Well, for many businesses though, Jennifer, the volume of the paperwork has been so overwhelming. Like, can you speak about the practical impact of that paperwork burden? Because many businesses actually needed to hire extra staff. And I think you said in some companies it was an extra person, seriously, to do that paperwork, wasn't it?
Yeah, I remember a comment from a grower based in the north of England who said to me after the EU UK reset with this, this horizon, this fabulous solution on the horizon, said to me, imagine what I'm going to get those people to do now. Just, the idea that, and I recall another conversation with somebody else where they said, this was quite frequent, where I'd speak to them and they said, I have spent all morning trying to find out where my seeds are, these types of things. And if you just imagine that replicated across the industry, nobody's joined horticulture to do paperwork. If they have, then please do write in and let us know. But this is everybody's joined it because they're passionate about being there with the plants, seeing them growing, doing what they do as horticultural experts. So, I think what we know, businesses are lean already. They've stripped out, as then we're seeing, the cost of employing people has gone up through the roof this year in particular. So I think they will see the opportunity to work in different ways. That said, it's not, the changes haven't come in yet. They will take time. So this isn't around the corner. This is, in the medium term. And yeah, I'm really excited to see what it might mean in terms of releasing more productivity in the sector. It's quite exciting.
But Sally, one of the concerns that businesses might have is balancing the removal of this excessive bureaucracy with maintaining high biosecurity standards. So what safeguards will be in place to make sure that plant health is protected, even if those checks are simplified?
Indeed. So when we think of biosecurity, what we shouldn't be thinking of is that the checks at the border are delivering the biosecurity. That's not what delivers biosecurity. Okay. It's the supply chain itself that delivers the biosecurity, while the authorities give you the tools, the knowledge, and the legislation to apply that based on what they know about pests and diseases and what the risk is. So the authorities give us the tools and the supply chain implements the biosecurity. So we might need a little bit of help along the way to understand what is required within the supply chain. And actually, checks, border and phytosanitary certificates don't deliver that. They are literally tools to make sure everyone is compliant. So if we remove those, we still need to be biosecure. And that can be delivered in a number of different ways. We can, for example, have voluntary certification schemes such as Plant Healthy or OHAS, Ornamental Horticulture Assurance Schemes, and other schemes as well, whereby we make sure within our businesses we have the right processes, and we make sure we're doing our due diligence with our suppliers to make sure they are delivering us a biosecure product. Mm-hmm. And yes, while there are risks inherent in any plant or tree or plant product moving within trade, whether it's across borders or in the internal market, those tools will help us to mitigate the risks that we have. Mm-hmm. While the authorities can deliver something along the lines of national measures. So this is something that we had pre-Brexit, and it's likely that we will return to that, where if you are in the EU plant health area, there's obviously so many different zones with different pests in different areas. And what we don't want to do is move those pests and diseases around between the areas. And a national measure will allow a country, for example, the UK, to say, we don't have that pest, you guys do. Mm-hmm. In order to move anything between that area, you must either comply with XYZ, and it will be host specific or pest and disease specific. And how we're going to check that is we might require you to tell us you're bringing those products in, or we're going to say we don't want those products, so therefore we're going to say no, we're going to prohibit them. It doesn't happen so often in the EU plant health area, but the biosecurity requirements do. So you might see an in-field inspection, a follow-up from a plant health inspector, and also just to make sure that you're doing everything that you should be doing to make sure you're biosecure.
Okay, excellent. This is you both explaining this so perfectly. I think this is going to be really, really good for listeners to really understand what has happened since Brexit and what that EU reset can bring as well. So I'm coming back to you, Jennifer. So businesses in the sector have obviously seen costs rise due to this combination of Brexit, energy price increases, inflation. Do you think when the reset happens, we'll see those costs decrease in short to medium term? Or do you think the price of horticultural goods is likely to remain high due to those ongoing economic pressures,
So I think what's really interesting in recent years, and this applies across business sectors, is a rule of thumb is that uncertainty brings cost in a business. So the minute you don't have certainty, then you've got many different factors that can impact how you do things. And you've just articulated a lot of those different things which have brought uncertainty. But that almost feels like it's the new normal, that's baked into how we do things. And indeed, in the sector anyway, I think there is something with the fact that we can't control the weather and other things where we naturally know that we can't control everything. But I think really where we've seen with costs that have flowed through, indeed, that has been passed on to the customer. And that does mean ultimately that people are paying more. And it isn't just one single factor. I think the other thing is worth noting is that actually a lot of people say to me, people expect to pay too little for the amount of labour, energy that goes into horticultural products. So actually, and we see this, we sort of talk about this, but ultimately this should release some opportunities for business to invest in other things. So it should reduce costs for businesses to look at doing things they've wanted to do for years. So that may well be investing in automation, different equipment, expanding their sites, doing all sorts of things. And I think that will give people actually not just the financial ability to do that, which we don't quite know exactly what that'll look like, but also the capacity to be able to think about it. The number of conversations where people are extremely stressed, the level of frustration about having to just deal with the amount of all of what we talked about, the paperwork, the problems, supply chains, is really a position that we want to be away from, and allowing businesses to do what they're good at, which is focusing on their businesses and growing more. And I think that is really exciting. And maybe we might actually see some efficiencies because we now know our supply chains better than probably we've ever known them. Yep. Actually, what can we look to do? Actually, is there an opportunity to source more domestically? We know some people have been able to take advantage of that. We want to grow more here and grow our domestic market much more both as a market and for growers. So I think that's also a top priority as well. So there's quite a lot in there, a kind of non-answer, but I think we, to a certain extent, we don't know, but we need to remove all the barriers to allow this to happen. And then businesses, some will take advantage in different ways.
So, Sally, exports have been heavily impacted by Brexit with a 39% drop since 2016. How do you see the reset impacting exports to the EU? And what steps is the HTA taking to encourage more trade in both directions once the reset is implemented?
Great question. Well, it's not just exports to the EU that have been affected. It's also, and I'm using quote marks here with my fingers, exports to Northern Ireland, because the same rules have applied to Northern Ireland as have applied to the EU, because Northern Ireland is in the EU's plant health area. So therefore, we've seen a massive reduction in trade from Great Britain to Northern Irish garden centres and nurseries. So we are hoping that with the reset, Northern Ireland trade at least has an opportunity to resume from GB nurseries. And therein lies the word, it's opportunity. So while we will see an opening up of those barriers and a lifting of the difficulties that we see, those exports are then able to resume if the market can be regained. So it's, for example, some of the exports that we've been seeing that have completely stopped have been for prohibited species. So the EU prohibits a number of tree species to be exported into their EU plant health area, which means that if we are in the same plant health area, those tree species can then be traded with the EU. I mean, it's about being positive about it. So making sure that we take those opportunities if possible. And obviously, to have that, we need a robust UK production sector.
Yeah, which brings me on to your Strong Roots initiative, which is launching in October, which is focusing more on UK-based growing, particularly around trees. How does that fit into the broader picture of the reset in that case then? Because domestic growing is obviously a great way to mitigate some of the trade challenges that are caused by Brexit. So British grown plants could become a bit of a future, right?
Absolutely. I mean, we have seen a little bit of shift over the last few years to more in-house production. But the horticultural trade is an international, global trading sector. I don't think people realise just quite how much we do trade. It might not be mature plants. It might be the raw materials that we need, such as cuttings or seeds or rootstock for trees. We don't have those sectors, those subsectors in the UK for various historical reasons. But that doesn't mean to say we can't see the opportunity and increase UK production, as well as making sure we can trade in what we need with our trading partners, with our closest trading partner. So half of what we sell in the UK, whether that's into retail or amenity or whatever market it might be, we import. So there's plenty of scope for within the UK to increase our production of whether it's mature trees or whether it's smaller plants or whether it's house plants or cut flowers or whatever that might be. But we'll never lose that important trading partnership with our EU colleagues.
That's interesting. And we can actually, from all of Brexit and everything, we can actually pull out a few silver linings, like obviously the visibility of our root of the plants, the kind of like food chain, but also the biosecurity that we've talked about as well, but also British grown plants as well, which could be a booming industry that we invest in. So Jennifer, as we look ahead to the reset's full implementation, which takes about 18 months, what would be the next step for businesses in the meantime? Like what practically really happens now? Like what will you guys be up to in the next 18 months as well? And how can any businesses really prepare for the challenges ahead? Because it's very important to keep behaving as normal, isn't it? It's not that we can suddenly just drop all the paperwork. Isn't that right?
Absolutely. So nothing has changed as of us sitting here today. Now we're going to ask for easements as soon as they're practically possible. And we think that should be quite soon. But that will need to be done on both sides to perhaps reduce some of that pain, and also take a bit more of a pragmatic approach. I think the key thing is communication. I think one of the things that we've learned about all of this is just talking to each other, talking to your suppliers, keeping those conversations going. And also, I would say this, wouldn't I? But, come to us. If you're not an HTA member, join. But no, work with us, because actually we are only as good as the information we get from our members, for us to be able to paint the picture and use our expertise, then get the results that we need for our members. So, talk to us. We can't always provide the answers, but we usually know where to find it. And I think it's just being part of this and trying to, keep that conversation going. So if I was a business and I've had to cope with a number of things I've had to adapt to and costs over recent years, what I would be doing now is really trying to just make sure I fully understand where those costs are, and what, think practically. Okay, if I wasn't having to fill in this bit of paperwork or do this, what would that mean for me? The sooner you can start thinking about those opportunities, the better. What we can't tell you is exactly when they will actually change, and you'll be able to be freed up. So, the status quo is as it is. So you need to keep implementing things at the moment. That is unfortunate, but it's just a reality. Talk to us, work with us, and be part of HTA, because we are a membership organisation and that's what we do. So we're quite excited about what's to come. I'm really excited about it.
I know. Thank you both. Thank you for joining today and shedding light on this long journey for the horticulture sector, which isn't over yet. The EU reset does hold tremendous potential for the industry as well, which is brilliant. And the HTA, you're obviously working tirelessly to meet the needs of your members, which are growers, importers and exporters. But kind of looking ahead, just some kind of closing remarks, really. There's still a few challenges to navigate. What would you say to listeners who are actually working through the transition themselves as well? Kind of like, it really is just about sitting tight, kind of like making sure you're an HTA member as well. This is your final chance to really give an advert for that, ladies.
Keep going and keep growing. And I think that is the main thing. What we've learned is also, don't assume that people know what an issue is. A lot of this is on paper in an agreement, and until it's applied practically in a business, we don't know what the impact is. So please don't assume that people really know what the cost and impact is. Share that with us.
Keep communicating in all directions, definitely.
100%.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
that is perfect. Thank you very much. And when it's all done, maybe in 18 months, are you going to take a holiday then, or what will you do after that?
I am so excited about talking to people about exports. And I think that the UK, so
big,
maybe
new
that's
new markets. It's going to be amazing.
The next podcast, Michael, could be UK exports.
Absolutely. That is fantastic. So this is a real positive that's come out of EU reset, Brexit, all of that muddle. We can really see positives. And I think that's what we do really well in the UK, finding the positives. Anyway, thank you for joining us today very much. Really appreciate your time.
Thank you for hosting.
Thank you.
Queen and Fine Floral Design are sponsors of the plant-based podcast for Series 19. We provide nature-led designs for your home, office and events, because flowers really do make people happy. Check us out at queenandfine.com and follow us on Instagram at queenandfine.